being recorded, we have a few things here that you can control with your own console there. So you can hide the control panel at any time. You can also go to full screen by clicking that box there. All the mics are currently muted, so that's just to cut back on any of the feedback and background noise that you typically hear. So if you would like to ask any questions, we really recommend just using that question panel there. And just feel free to type in your questions here at any point. Between the three of us, we'll be checking in on those and making sure to get to those questions you have during the webinar. If at any point you find the audio is a little choppy or coming in inconsistently, feel free to change your audio mode at any time by just selecting telephone or mic and speakers, and you'll be taken through the steps to change the audio mode. Okay, so who is LTech? Well, LTech is a Google Apps Premier partner. We're also an Amazon Web Services consulting partner, and we obviously have worked with you already, most likely on your Google Apps deployment. We do managed services deployments, migrations. We also handle training and change management, and we definitely provide support and other products. So we are definitely a partner for you, and most of you have already been working with us for some time. And we do provide these monthly webinars, and we have some other upcoming events, which I'll tell you about at the end of this webinar. So what is our agenda today? We're going to be talking about Google Groups, obviously, and really defining what Google Groups are, what they can do. We'll talk about the top 5 reasons you would want to use Google Groups. And then we're going to focus on the 2 types of Google Groups that we feel are a great starting point if you're going to be using Google Groups. Many of you are probably already using Google Groups as distribution lists. And we're also going to talk about this collaborative inbox feature, which is a very nice feature of Google Groups. So we'll be getting into the detail there. And then we're going to talk about how to configure Google Groups as an admin. Obviously, most of you on this call should be admins for your organizations. And so you're going to want to know sort of all the configuration and sort of how to control the different settings and what they mean. So we're going to be talking about that as well. And then we're going to leave some time at the end for some Q&A. So let's talk about what Google Groups are. So Google Groups is part of that Google Apps Suite. You have Mail, you have Calendar, you have Contacts, you also have Google Groups. Should appear in that top black bar where your apps are. And it's a tool that enables you to create online and email-based groups. You can use groups in different ways. So you can use them as a very basic email list, a distribution type list. You can also use Google Groups as this collaborative inbox, which is really great for sort of support tickets and managing customer service inquiries. And we're going to look at that in more detail. You could also use Google Groups as a web or Q&A forum. Those areas we're not going to go into as much detail on. We don't have enough time. And we really do feel like the email list and collaborative inbox are, like I said, a great starting point and 2 great features of Google Groups that we can spend some time on today. So what can you do with Google Groups? You can do all these things. You can read group posts through email, or you can go into this online interface. You can organize meeting, conferences, events with the group. So it's much easier to incorporate a larger set of group members by just using that Google Group email address. You can create a question and answer customer support group for a product. You could also, as I mentioned earlier, track and manage support requests from coworkers or customers. And again, that collaborative inbox will make that very easy for you. So it really gives you a lot of abilities to both correspond internally within your organization, makes that very easy and streamlined, and also works obviously very well with the other Google apps. It's all very integrated. And it also provides you with a great way to interface with your external clients and customers and partners. So the top 5 reasons to use Google Groups. Well, Google Groups is very configurable and customizable, so you can really manage access to those who need it, which we think is really useful when you're creating something like this that many people are members of and using. You can really decide how you want people to access it and what kind of permissions they have. So it has also very flexible configuration for different roles. So if you're a member, you can do certain things. If you're a manager, if you're an owner, and that can be even further defined. So we're going to talk about that. And Brian is certainly going to show you how to configure that in those ways where you can really get into the nitty gritty of controlling some of those settings. You can communicate really easily by sharing information with Google Groups. So, and Jason's going to look at that too. How do you create calendar events with groups and share documents in Google Drive and folders and even sites? So there's a lot you can do using Google Groups as a way to communicate. Makes it much easier and much more efficient. And then you can easily incorporate email communication into your workflows. So the way that you have this online interface, you also can use Google Groups within your email. You get emails as people are using that Google Group address. So there's a lot you can do there as well. And then using the collaborative inbox, you can really serve your clients better. You can categorize inquiries and emails that come in and track them and respond to inquiries. You can assign certain emails that come in to different coworkers. And there's a lot you can do from a customer service or an IT support perspective that will be really useful. We're going to show you more about that. So I wanted to just mention other ways you can share information. So sometimes people get a little bit confused with Google Groups, like, oh, these are just my contact groups and my contacts, right? Well, no, they're different. So personal contact groups and contacts versus Google Groups, I just wanted to highlight some of those areas that are different. So a Google group will have its own unique email address, and that can be shared in the groups directory, and other people can send messages to it. So it's its own email that has lots of members as part of that email address, and then email that's sent to that one email address comes into each member's recipient's inbox. With contact groups, it's a little bit different. You're using that for your own personal use. They don't have their own email address. You create a contact group like marketing, and it has Susan, Brian, Jason. Those are the 3 email addresses that make up that contact group for my own purposes, and I can send a quick email to that contact group whenever I want via email. And it's a little bit different than a group. It's a contact group. So you would use that for your own personal use. And again, you can use that, but other people can't use your contact groups. They're not sending messages to them. That's really just for you. So emails that are sent to a Google group, contrarily, are received in group members' email inbox, or you can go to this group's interface. So the contact groups in your contacts don't have that aspect at all. They don't have this other separate interface, which we're going to look at in more detail. The other area that I wanted to make sure to clarify is this delegated email account access. So you can grant account access to an email account to other mail users, and that's up to 25 people can have access to an email account, to the same email account. This is a little bit different. You're not going to get all the features of, let's say, the collaborative inbox and being able to sort of track and manage inquiries that come in. And obviously, having another email account requires the purchase of an additional license. So why use Google Groups? Well, it creates a distribution list for your organization. So again, creates this ability to have all these distribution lists that you probably had in whatever system you had before. So you're going to want to replicate that feature. It will save the cost of additional licenses. As I mentioned in the previous slide, you won't have to buy an additional license to use a Google Group. And it mimics this shared mailbox functionality in Outlook. It can also be used in some ways as your public shared folders in Outlook. When you have emails in there that everyone needs to get access to, you can use Google Groups in this way. It's also a good alternative to email delegation. So again, versus that having that separate account, if you have more than 25 people that need access, you would want to start looking at Google Groups. So it's really good for this technical support or customer service type of environment where you're wanting to support external and customer questions and requests. And other people from the outside obviously can send messages to this Google group. So it makes it very easy for them to communicate with you in one fell swoop. They send an email to that group, and you know that everyone who's a member of that group can see that email. And then members of groups can respond on behalf of the group. So if emails are coming in to support at LTech or training at LTech, I can respond on behalf of that email address, that training at ltech.com. So that also makes it very easy to communicate with clients and external users from that email address. And you can really manage bulk data outside of the personal inbox. So you could use the group's interface as a way to manage that communication without having that clutter up your inbox. So you could turn off emails that get received in your inbox and just use this group's interface as a way to manage that information. And we're going to show you more about that group's interface and what it looks like. And then it really can provide a knowledge base for your staff of someone who new who comes in who needs to kind of understand, maybe they're part of a customer support team. They can come in, they can read a lot of the information that's been coming into that Google group, and really get a lot of knowledge, and get up to speed on some of that information quickly. So it's kind of a knowledge base. It can serve as that as well. All very useful tools and aspects of Google Groups. So I'm going to now pass this over to Jason, who's going to start talking about the more specifics. He's going to go into what a distribution, how to use Google Groups as a distribution list, and then how to use Google Groups as a collaborative inbox. So I'll just take a moment here and make Jason the presenter, and he can take it away from here. So Jason, are you there? Do you have access now to present? Great. And Jason, you might be on mute. I don't hear you. So we'll just give it a couple minutes.
Jason,
there we go. Okay? Yeah, perfect.
Great. My apologies. I was having audio issues with my telephone. Okay, so you can see my screen just fine?
Looks good.
Excellent. Okay, I'll get going. So thank you very much, Rachel. Yeah, I just wanted to show you some of the options. I'm going to start with distribution lists and how to use that in Calendar, in Google Drive, and also in Mail, and just talk a little bit about the use cases and how that works. And then I'm going to jump into the collaborative inboxes. But for now, let's start with Calendar. So as Rachel was pointing out, there's a lot of different reasons why you might need to have a distribution list. In particular, you want to reach out to a large group of people very quickly, or perhaps you have a project that's being monitored and managed, and there are people coming in and out of that project frequently. And you don't want to have the project manager be the one in charge of making sure that this works and functions as needed. You'd much rather, from an administrative level, just be able to automatically add someone to that list when they join the company or someone changes, and then they have access to all the data that's shared with them, and that's exactly how groups will work. So for example, in this calendar item, let's say I want to set up an appointment with Project X, okay? So we have a Project X team right here, and I'm going to add them. And as you can see, Project X is now added to this particular invite. I can add a time. I'll just add a Google Hangout for the sake of this, and I'll take a look, and I'll just say, yeah, 4:30 is fine. We'll call this status update. Okay? And what will happen is everybody that's involved in Project X will get an invitation to this event. So as you can see, the event was created, and I'll just go in and do that one more time. I simply typed in Project X. I added it, and I'll just call this status update, and we are good to go. And we'll send over, there we go. So that's pretty easy. The same thing works in Mail. If I was to create a message, right, and I wanted to communicate with Project X, I would actually be able to do the same thing. And I can go status update again if I wanted to, and then go on and go forward with that. I'm able to communicate with the entire group, and that also works well for mass mailings too. Actually, in fact, a lot of ways that administrators or organizations that are on Google avoid some of the sending limits is by using the distribution list option in Google Groups. So for example, I have a group called All, which is everyone at Collaboration Corporation, which is our test account right here. And I just want to say welcoming new employee Chuck McGillicuddy. Okay, welcome Chuck, right? And so now Chuck is a member of the team, and we wanted to make sure that everybody had access to see that message. Okay, and that was how I would do that. Also, if you have a, let's say you have a lot of vendors that you work with, maybe you have a couple thousand people that you have to contact on a regular basis, and you want to let them know about maybe it's your customer base, and you want to send a message to them saying, hey, we have a new updated product. We wanted to let you know how this works. Or maybe you're having a monthly webinar and you want to reach out and say, hey, we're going to be doing this webinar and we're interested in sharing this information with you. Brian will show you a little bit later, but you can create those distribution lists, and then when your marketing team or whoever's putting together this information wants to send that out, they can send on behalf of that actual group. So for example, I'm going to show you a little bit more about this, but if I wanted to, this is actually a group, shipping at collaborationcorporation.com. I can actually send on behalf of that group rather than sending it for myself. We work with an educational group that actually wanted to send mass messages directly from the president, but didn't actually didn't want it to be the president's personal mailbox. So instead, we created, president at institution.edu, and that way the marketing team or whoever could actually create, compose, and manage that messaging on behalf of that person. And it went out to every single person that was part of the institution, alumni, everything. And that was really easy to do by using distribution groups. The same type of functionality is also built into Drive. So just as I wanted to reach out to Project X, I can create a document or even a folder if you want, and I'll call this Project X folder, or I don't need to call it folder because it is a folder. I'll create that, and as you can see, there's Project X, and then quite quickly I can just say, you know what, everything, I want this to be accessible to all members of Project X. Then I simply add Project X, and they have edit access or view access. I'm going to say edit access, and I'm going to share that. Now what's great about this is using these lists, okay? All the members of Project X, as I talked about earlier, let's say you have some turnaround, someone leaves Project X, maybe Sally moves on into the world and gets a better job. Freddie comes in and needs to work on Project X. By just adding Freddie, you're going to be able to have access to this information. And that goes over into sites too. Maybe you have an intranet site that you're working on, and you want to make sure that Freddie has access to all the data that's accessible to Project X because he's now part of that team. And that works out really well, and he has that access, which is really very helpful. In addition to that too, I mentioned about the distribution list. If you want to send out, large quantities of mail, distribution lists are very good, mainly because you're able to bypass some of those restrictions that you may have if you have mass mailings, and also doesn't give any visibility to the recipients of who is actually receiving those mails as well, which is nice. Now, what I wanted to spend a little bit more time on, let me just make sure that I have this up here, is I want to get back to here. So that's really the core of distribution lists, right? And since you're all already on Google Apps for Business, you know that these lists can be moved into Google Apps, and we can work with you if you have any further questions about that as well. But the collaborative inbox is something that I really want to spend a little bit more time on, mainly because I think it's a bit of a forgotten soldier in Google Apps. It has some really nice functionalities built in. It takes the concept of what you can do with groups in distribution lists to a different level. And I want to show you exactly how that works. So I'm going to just minimize this and just jump into groups. Now you would access groups by clicking right here, if you don't know that already. And it'll take you to a page that says, hey, let's get into groups, and you click on My Groups. And just as a warning, you may have multiple domains and such, and you may get a notification like this that says, hey, you also belong to a different group with a different organization, and that's where you would show that. So if you're going through and you can't find the specific group you're looking for, likely it's hidden right here, and just make sure to click show, and that'll get you to it. For the sake of this demonstration, I'm going to show you shipping. So this is a collaborative inbox that we put together. As you can see, we have all kinds of messages in here within the collaborative inbox. Now, taking that same example that we use with Sally leaving and Freddie coming in to the project, if Freddie was added to this collaborative inbox, this group, Freddie will be able to see all this historical data instantaneously. By just logging in, going into groups, Freddie would have full visibility to all of this information, which is really very helpful, especially if you're using the collaborative inbox to track a project, to maybe showcase some statistics that you're working on in relation to getting something done. And Freddie really needs to be brought up to speed as quickly as possible for all things relating to this project. Well, in this particular case, the collaborative inbox would have all that data right in there, searchable using Google search, of course, built right in. And as you can see in here, this looks a little different than what you would expect to see when you're then in Drive or Calendar or Mail. It's, this is configured specifically for Google Groups. As you can see here, you can search by tags. You can search by message ID. Of course, your typical attributes such as has the words, doesn't have the words, subject. And you can even search within groups too. In this particular case, I'm going to search within shipping. And I'm going to actually search for a tag called canceled. Or I think there was only one message that had the word canceled. So I'm going to type in canceled, and I'm going to search for it. And what it'll do is, boom, automatically, as you can see, here's the tag. It automatically populates all the messages in this group that have the tag of canceled. Now, what are tags, and what does that mean, right? Well, within the message itself, as we're going through, and I'll get into what this is over here. This is what really makes it neat. But we can add tags as well to any particular order or part of the group if you'd like to. So this one, for example, was labeled as canceled, and primarily because the order was not shipped and it has been canceled. As you can see, shipping responded to this message originally from Brian that said, hey, I'd like to cancel my order. And then shipping was able to respond and saying, no problem, we've canceled your order. And we added the tag called canceled. Therefore, anything that's been canceled, we add that tag and you can search by it, and makes it very easy to access. And Brian actually marked it as complete too. So, and that's something else you can search for too. Going back to the actual group, you can, there's all types of filters that you can go through. For example, what I really like, from a management standpoint, is if we're using groups, I can search by resolution status, right? I want to look for everything that's been resolved, everything that's been marked as a best answer. We don't use that as often, but that could be very helpful if you have a public-facing group. But this is really good right here, right? I want to see everything that hasn't been resolved yet. Show me that right away. That makes it very, I would say, definitely more accessible. And I can say, you know what, apply these search filters, and then these are all the open items. So if it's open, what does that mean? What I'm going to do is I'm going to see here that Reggie Jackson actually sent us a message about product SKU 345. So I'm going to take a look at that message from Reggie, and it says, I was interested in purchasing this product, but see it was no longer in stock, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so you know what? I know exactly who I need to assign that to. I'm not going to take this myself, but I'm going to assign it to one of our project leads. I'm going to assign that to Brian. So, and I can even add a little message saying, please get in touch with Reggie ASAP, okay? And I'll just assign that to Brian. And now, as you can see, it's been assigned to Brian by me. And that actually highlights who that is, which is great. Now, in Brian's inbox, he's going to get a message that looks just like this. As you can see right here, this is from Rachel, actually. She assigned this to me. It says, it'll say topic, new ordering system has been assigned to you by Rachel, which is nice because it shows you specifically who the people are that assigned you the task. So if you have a manager or you have an executive that tells you that this is your assignment, hey, I better act on this because, management has told me to do so. And here's what's really great about it too, is it gives you direct interaction, okay? Rachel mentioned earlier, some people do get confused between delegated mailboxes and also with contact groups, right? Well, this type of functionality simply doesn't exist if you're using delegated mailboxes. This allows me to do a quick click directly to the actual ordering the message from shipping directly from my mail into groups. So I'm able to access this right away. I can reply. And what's nice is within the reply, I can actually post on behalf of shipping, or I can post it on behalf of myself. For this one, I'm going to post on behalf of shipping, and I'm going to tell Pam that it will be implemented tomorrow. And I'll post that. And since I sent that, I'm going to say that we're good. And let's see here. And then we're good to go. Okay. And we're all set here. So I can continue to go through these messages and mark through. Now, as you can see here, this is marked complete. This I can reassign this if I need to. You can also get duplicates. Let's say you are using the collaborative inbox as a support at, and you're getting a mountain of messages from one particular person. And so the manager is going through and saying, this is duplicate. We've already assigned this task. You're able to do that as well. So I showed you the tags. I showed you how you can assign. You can actually also opt to have these messages show up in your inbox. For example, this message came from shipping. It actually went right to me. So the option is you can have the messages end up in your inbox if you prefer. Maybe the manager would like to have that, or maybe a specific person who manages a lot of these messages would want to have that. But you can turn it off too and just work in this interface. And that's what I like. I like to, I only have these turned on here just to show you what it looks like. But primarily, look, if I'm dealing with shipping, I'll be notified when I'm assigned. And since this has been assigned to me, I can go directly to there and take care of it. Otherwise, I don't want all this to clutter my inbox. I'd much rather my inbox be clean and work within messages that are specific to me, okay? And I'm able to do that, and I'll be notified when needed. Okay? So again, the only other thing I wanted to show you is that I showed you the filters. There's a lot of actions as well too. For example, is if I click right here, I can go to actions. I can do all these things directly from here. Perhaps you have some spam that's coming in for some reason. You can ban the author so that no longer shows up. You can lock the topic, lock replies, make sure it shows up at the top if you'd like to. And the different functions and features that are available inside the message as well. You can do from just looking at multiple messages at the same time. So I can select a whole bunch of messages all at once, and I can mark as read, duplicate, move assign. I can bulk assign if I'd like to as well to make my life a lot easier when I'm managing this team. Okay. So from here, I'm going to go back to the slide deck, and let me just condense this a little bit here and jump back to here. And I will go to slide 12. There we go. All right, Brian, it's all yours.
Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, of course.
So let's talk a little bit about what's an admin group versus what's a user managed group. So we're familiar with admin managed groups where we have distribution lists. We've had them in our old mail system. We've probably been using them already for email distribution purposes or whatever the case may be. But user managed groups are a little bit different. We have the option in the control panel of actually giving the end users the ability to create their own groups, which may or may not be a good idea depending on the size of your organization. But we can have it happen. And if you are doing GAD syncing, those groups won't be affected by this sync. So it identifies them as being created by an end user and will not erase them or delete them. So let's talk a little bit about how we get into the control panel and get started on all of this. So this is the interface that we're used to here under groups, right? So if I wanted to create a new distribution list and I'm not using GADs, I would go in and create a new group. And at the end of the day, at the end of the bottom here, I would have myself a distribution list. So we've probably already done this. I won't spend too much time on this, but if we did want to create a collaborative inbox, this is one of the ways we can do it. As an admin, we may be more familiar with going in through the groups interface and creating them this way. And then once it's created, you can go in there and then view it in the Google Groups interface. If I was an admin and I knew that I was setting out to create a collaborative inbox, I would probably actually start in the groups interface. Give this a second for it to load. Click through the new groups version. And when we go in here, we will see the option of being able to create a new group. Give this a second. So if I know I'm going to create a collaborative inbox, I'll go in here and say create group, and I'll get all of the options up, plus some additional ones. So what am I going to call the group? What's the email address going to be? And so on and so forth. The key down here is the type of group. So in this case, we're not going to make an email list. We're going to go ahead and make a collaborative inbox. And what that does is that makes some of the default settings pre-done for you so that it behaves as you want for a collaborative inbox. Going down a little bit further, talk about who are the participants of the group, who can do what. It's probably a good idea to set these now because there are so many settings that if you try to go through this afterwards in the regular interface, it can get overwhelming. You would add the people as you want to in here, or you can invite them later. You can invite users. Anyone can ask to join the group. Keep in mind that some of these settings, the verbiage on the setting, who can post, who can do this, is really a throwback to the origin of groups, which was more like a Usenet or bulletin board um, aspect to it. So the web functionality of it, we still see that language in here. So don't get confused on when it says who can post, right? We're really talking about who can mail to the group, and it just happens to show up in this web UI. So in this case, I could go ahead and create a group, and that would create a collaborative inbox. But if I have a normal group, let's go back to the shipping group. If I have a distribution list today and I go into my groups interface, I would be able to find this group, and then I can go through some of the settings. But if I have a distribution list that I then want to convert into a collaborative inbox, I can go under here under information and go advanced, and I can actually reset the group type down here. So if maybe I made a collaborative inbox and I'm going to change my mind, it shouldn't be, it should just be an email list. I can go through here, reset the group, force the reset the group to be whatever format I want. But that lets us switch gears midstream, right? So if I created a distribution list, but I say, hey, this would probably be better as a collaborative inbox because I want to capitalize on some of that functionality, we can do that after the group's created. So while I'm in here, let's talk about a couple of other settings. Some of the gotchas in groups, I mean, there's just a ton of settings. I encourage you to go through them and look at them. But some of the other settings we want to know about, right? Well, who are managers and owners? Managers have a couple different functions. They actually manage the group just as you'd expect, but they can also go in and do the message moderation, add members and things like that. Owners are the creators of the group, very similar in role. So when we say message moderation, what's that mean? Well, you can actually have the group do a couple things for moderation. Think of this as a public-facing group. Do I want everybody to be able to email in on the first try and have it, just like a mailing list get sent to everybody in the group? Well, maybe not. Maybe I want that captured in moderation before it gets let out. One of the other things that we want to look at here is the actual moderation. So groups have their own level of spam filtering. And sometimes organizations, when they start using groups, some of the emails get hung up in this spam filter, and they don't know what happened, and it's just that they sent a message to the group and it never got through. So one of the things I'd recommend is if you're going to start using Google Groups for Business is to go in under Settings and Moderation and turn off the spam moderation for a Google group. This will help eliminate that. So we can skip moderation queue and post to the group. If you did have that turned on, then you would have to go in under pending messages periodically and check it unless you had it notifying you. So messages could get stuck there if for some reason you didn't have an owner or a manager specified. No one would get notified that there's a message pending, and something like an order or a customer inquiry may sit in there indefinitely. So that's a little bit about the permissions. Like I said, there are a ton here. One of the interesting ones here is tags. I can make it so that there's a maximum number of tags. Maybe we don't want to get too many, but we can also come in and edit tags and create more. So you may be chomping at the bit. Hey, I want to use Google Groups for Business. It hasn't been turned on for my domain yet. So let's talk about how to do that. It may seem straightforward, but it's really not. So we'll wait for this to load. So what we probably recommend is testing this on a few users first, right? So we're going to use orgs and users, and maybe if you have an IT org or if you have an org where you can put a few people in there, let's go ahead and create an org and assign that to that org. However, you won't find it coming up as an app by default. So you actually have to go in here under Common Tasks and do Get More Apps and Services. So in here, you would actually see the option of how to turn on Google Groups. It's kind of a throwback to the way it used to be, how we used to add services before that we added onto the core services. That has to be done first. And then what I would probably recommend is applying it to a small group, training IT people, someone who can learn how to use it before letting everybody have it. So after you do that, you can assign it to the organization just like every other service. So one of the things I wanted to show you in here in settings, which is interesting, is if I click on settings and groups for business, these are the settings that we can change across the board. So we can't do this by org, but we have some functionality or some options here. Do I want to make my groups public on the internet? It's up to your organization, maybe, maybe not, but we can certainly limit it to just private groups. So this is the one I was talking about before. Only domain admins can create groups, or anyone in the domain can create groups, right? Depending on your organization, most organizations probably want to limit this to the domain admin so that we don't have the Wild West going on with all kinds of groups all over the place that nobody knows and uses. A couple more options down here. What can owners do, right? Owners can actually decide to keep their groups out of the groups directory. So that's in that first interface that we saw when Jason first clicked on groups. And we can hide newly created groups from the groups directory, vice versa. So we have some functionality here. This does go across the board. It's not limited by org. This is the one we'd really like you to focus on is, who's going to create these groups. So I think that's about it for the creation of use of Google Groups for Business. So let's go back and review. So we talked about admin managed groups, how they differ or how you would create them as an admin versus going into the groups interface. Like I said, if you're set out to make a collaborative inbox, let's try it out. Probably start right in the groups interface rather than going in through the regular admin control panel, creating the group and then changing it into a collaborative inbox. Talked about who's a member, who's a manager. One of the other settings that I didn't touch on is we can actually control as the manager how people get their emails. So if a user calls up and says, I don't like all these messages coming in, or as Jason saw with his mail, I'm getting all these emails all the time and anything happens in the group, but I'm in there all day anyway, I don't need to be in there. Well, then we can change their subscription, or they can do it themselves. This is an important one. Document how your team should use the group as an email list, or more importantly, we'll skip over this one, how in the collaborative inbox are we going to use this in the organization? So let's do some training. If users are able to create their own groups, let's talk about some of the settings that they're going to want to change right off the bat. So we don't have a lot of areas where we can have default settings, but if as an organization we've decided some settings are better than others, then let's document that and get that out there for the end users in case they're creating their own. If you have something like a service desk creating these groups, same thing. Let's document all the things that need to be changed every time a new group is created as part of a service ticket and before the user has access. And maybe do some training or come up with some best practices internally. So I'm going to pass this back over to Rachel. We're going to do questions and answers, and I hope that was helpful.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, so let's see here. I will get this set up here. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen now. So we wanted to definitely leave time for questions. So please don't be shy and type in those any questions you have into that question panel. And we can get more detailed into anything you want to see more of. If you want to look at any of the permissions or more of the configuration, we'd be happy to answer any of those questions for you. I wanted just to show, because we'd sort of talked about it too, how members would control their membership settings. And I think that's sort of an important area to look at. So I'm just going to pull up a group and show you where you do that. But while we're waiting, please feel free to just type any questions you have into that question panel. So let's see here. I'm going to show you the screen in a second. Okay. So you should be able to see the shipping group. It's that same group that Jason was showing previously. And I just wanted to point out that as a member of the group, I could go into my settings here and I could decide how I want to control my email settings. So if I actually didn't want to get an email message for every new message and I just wanted to be able to log into the group's interface and manage it that way, I would say don't send me email updates. So that means it wouldn't come into my email inbox. I would instead be going in here to see all the new messages. And again, if anyone had assigned me something, I would get that notification. But it's a very flexible way to control your membership and your email settings. The other thing I wanted to point out that was on our slide deck here, and I'll share that with you via the chat. Let me just move this over, is that there's a lot of resources and help that Google provides. Obviously, there are a lot of help documents on their help site. Some of it is a little bit buried, so you have to sort of click around to find it. I do find their help documents about configuring an email list and configuring collaborative inbox to be pretty useful because they will include all the preset permissions and role configuration that you can expect. So if you wanted to actually adjust those, which you could still do even though it's preset, as Brian mentioned, there might be some that you want to go through and adjust based on your specific organizational needs. You can definitely do that, and it would just be good information for you to know, what are the permissions, what comes with, let's say, an email list. So I'm going to share this with you via the chat. It's just one of the help documents. You should see that in the chat window. And on page 3 to 4 of this document, this is an example of the email list. If you scroll down to those pages, you'll see all the default permissions that exist for the email list configuration when you're creating that in Google Groups. I think another really helpful one, obviously, is the collaborative inbox. So if we go to the next page and we look at that collaborative inbox, it's the same type of thing. It will show you, first of all, we'll sort of explain more about the collaborative inbox and how it works. And you'll also be able to scroll down to later pages here and see what all their permissions are. So what can managers do? What can owners do? What can members do? And these are configurable. So kind of a really good reference. I'm going to share this link as well, which is the collaborative inbox help document. And you should see that in your chat also. So those are two things. The other thing I just wanted to stress that Brian had mentioned is it's a really good idea to document how you want your users using Google Groups, whether it's a collaborative inbox or whether it's an email list. It's a really good idea to keep track of sort of how you want them using it and what the permissions are so people know, particularly if you're allowing users to create their own groups. That would be a good best practice. So lastly, I also wanted to mention that we're starting to provide Google Groups training because this is really a feature that, as I mentioned before, we think is sort of that forgotten soldier. It's overlooked. It's a really great application. I think people are interested in learning more about it. I'm happy to provide training to any of you on this webinar that would be interested in that, because as Brian pointed out, there are so many permissions and ways to configure Google Groups that it's a really powerful tool, but you sort of need to understand how it works and what all those permissions and sort of configuration aspects, what that means in order to start enabling that. So we do have training as part of our general training suite that we can provide to you. So let us know if you're interested. You can always email training@ltech.com and we'll be happy to respond to that. So I'm just going to pause here for 1 second and see if there are any questions. And as I said before, please don't hesitate to type any of your questions in. We have about 10 more minutes, and we'd be happy to answer anything for you. This is really a webinar for your purposes.
Hey, Rachel, we did get a question, and it was a good question actually, because it was about, if you're if you're using GADS and you are using collaborative inbox type of groups, what needs to be kept in mind? And that is a great question, because it certainly is different than what you would expect when you're using a standard distribution list between AD and Google Apps for Business.
Yep, it sure is. So the question about GADS is a good one. None of the custom settings or none of the settings outside of what's in GADS would be affected. So you can go ahead and switch it to a collaborative inbox or whatever type and do all of your settings, and GADS will ignore all of those. The only thing GADS will really affect is the group name and the members. So none of those customizations will be affected. If I said during the demo, if your users created or if you created through the groups interface, it doesn't necessarily have to be an AD. GADS will ignore it, so there's no worries there.
Great. Thanks for answering that question. Are there any other questions? Again, please feel free to type your questions into that question panel. And while we're waiting for that, just wanted to remind all of you about what's next. Our upcoming LTech events. So we have an Amazon Web Services disaster recovery webinar that is taking place tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And we also have this Arachna Orbit event as well, which talks about a better way to stay connected, managing documents and tasks, and collaborating with your team. So an interesting way to be sort of adding more functionality to Drive and to some of these other Google apps. So that might be of interest to some of you. LTech.com/events is where you'll find more information on any of our upcoming events. So feel free at any time to you might want to bookmark this page and keep up with what kind of events we have going on, so that will always be updated with anything we have. And also just wanted to remind you about our training. We have lots of training offerings for you at any time if you want to brush up on training.
Hey, Rachel?
Yeah.
Real quick, one point we did not touch on that with the question about collaborative inbox and GADS. If you want to migrate data into a collaborative inbox from a different distribution list that you may have had from your older system, that is absolutely doable. And there are tools available in order to get that done. If you have further questions about that, do feel free to reach out to us.
Yeah.
But do you want to touch on that, Brian?
So a little bit, right? If we had public folders, we can migrate those via GAMI into Google Groups. But also, if you've been using a shared mailbox today with delegation, you can use GAMI as the IMAP as a source and migrate into the Google Group, so you can convert that over without losing any of the data.
Yeah, that's what we wanted to touch on, just in case the question was also about migration. So that is doable and feasible.
Great. Any other questions before we end our webinar? Please just type those questions in. We'll give it a few more minutes and then we'll come back on and end our webinar. But please feel free to type those questions in at any time. We're here to answer them for you. Okay, doesn't look like there are any questions. Thank you so much for your time. We hope this was helpful. Feel free to contact us if you have any more questions. But we hope that you feel you learned something today, and it was our pleasure to take you through more detail about Google Groups. So thanks, everyone. I hope you have a great day and a great week. And take care, everyone. Thanks, Jason, and thanks, Brian.
Thank you very much. And there was a question about it being recorded. And yes, the question was, can this be distributed to other people in the organization if they weren't able to meet? And we'd be happy to get that to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. Bye. Have a great day.